Hey everyone, on this episode of Golden Key Design, we're going to turn this kitchen into this. Stay tuned to see how we did it. Roll the intro.
I'm Bianca.
And I'm Grant.
And this is the Lake House Project.
Now before we get to tiling, we first have to prep the drywall surface. If your drywall is already painted, you can go ahead and get started. However, ours is not painted, nor is it primed. So for us, the first step is priming the drywall. This creates a moisture barrier between the drywall and the thin set that will eventually be used to adhere the tile to the wall. We'll be using glass tile for our backsplash, which is more prone to chipping and cracking during the cutting process compared to other materials such as porcelain or ceramic. If you can, I would try to avoid using glass tile for that reason in particular. However, our favorite tile just happened to be made of glass, so we're gonna make it work. If you are going to be using glass tile, the manual cutters don't really work all that well, and you're gonna definitely need a wet saw, and make sure that you specifically use a glass tile cutting blade in your wet saw. Because we're going to be using glass tile and the edges are more prone to chipping, we're going to be painting a black perimeter around all of the backsplash area, so that way if the backing of the tile does get chipped away, instead of seeing the white drywall through it, you'll see a black painted surface and it won't really draw your eye to it at all. So now, let's get started. Alright, now before we start laying tile, I wanted to make sure that the stove, countertop, sink, and faucet were all protected from potentially getting scratched or nicked or potentially getting mortar on them. So I went ahead and cut some garbage bags and just taped those out and laid it over top of it just to make sure that they're all protected. And now here's the tile that we're going to be using. A lot of people wanted it horizontal and a lot of people wanted it vertical. We put out an Instagram poll and it was dead on 50-50 for both directions. I'm in the horizontal boat and I think that's the direction we're gonna go. However, I think it would look good in both orientations. Now before we start mixing up the mortar, I'm gonna try and pre-cut as many tiles as I can, and I'll be working from the left to the right. And as you can see, we have an outlet in the very first section of our tiling process. So I'm probably going to be pulling off some of these tiles from the mosaic mesh, putting them up on the wall, marking where the outlet is, go ahead and cut them and try and pre-cut as many as I can. That way when we mix up the mortar, we have everything ready to go. So let's get started.
As I mentioned, glass tile is very brittle and often difficult to cut, and so when I did my first couple pieces here, they were cracking pretty bad. So I cut this large format tile in half, and that kind of became a zero clearance insert for me, so that as I made it almost all the way through the whole tile, there was still enough of the lower tile to support it so it wouldn't crack.
Alright, so I think we're finally ready for the scary part of mixing up the mortar. I laid out some tiles to make sure we're happy with the design. I also pre-cut a lot of the tiles that are going to be going on the border along the counter as well as up the sides for those cuts. They're all going to be the same, so I just batched them out here. But cutting the glass tile has been a little bit aggravating and a little bit tricky because even when you're very careful and you're using a glass specific blade, it still is going to chip on you and you're still going to get cracks. And it's a little unfortunate and it's kind of like money down the drain a little bit. I tend to save the tiles in case I can maybe use them somewhere else in a different manner, but you just gotta slowly work your way through it, be patient, and know that you're gonna do a good job in the end. It just takes some time to get there. So anyway, let's get started and I hope this goes well. Alright, so I just finished mixing up the mortar. We're gonna start in this corner. We're using a 1/4 by 3/16 trowel, and yeah, here we go. All right, so we just got our first section done. This took maybe about an hour. Yeah, a lot longer than I was expecting. I had to cut a lot more tiles than I thought, and Going around this outlet or switch box was tough, but now that we have our base started, I think going over will be a lot quicker, and we don't have another outlet for about 4 or so feet. So that'll be nice, and we can just lay up some big mosaics, whereas this was a lot of individual cutting of the tiles, taking them off the mosaic, putting them up. A little bit stressful. You want to make sure you leave a gap around all the perimeter so you can fill that with silicone grout after the fact, just for expansion and contraction. But spacers were working. I mean, I'm pretty happy with the result. We're good. It's just getting there is always tough, but you just got to be patient and know that in the end it will look good. I'm really happy with the way this is looking. I like the horizontal tile. I think the mirror effect is really cool. But anyway, let's keep going. Alright, so that looks good. Now I'm probably gonna go back and fill in some of the pieces that I had to cut. So I'm gonna wipe away all of this mortar that you see. That way it doesn't harden up. Go make my cuts, mix up the mortar again in the bucket, maybe adding a little bit of water, then putting the mortar back on, and then installing the rest of those cut tiles. Let's get to it! Alright, so I'm gonna call it a day here. We got pretty much all of this section completed. I got all of the little cuts and everything, so this is 100% done on this side. And then tomorrow, we'll start going up for the hood, as well as all the way over to the refrigerator. And so I think this is about 50% of the way there, so that's nice to know that I think I can finish the entire tiling process tomorrow, and then we can grout on the third day. These garbage bags came in real handy. As you can see, there's just a ton of mortar and just random bits and pieces that fell. And so it's nice and easy place just to like wipe your hand. If you get it messy, you can just wipe it here and clean it up later. And so now I'm just going to roll it up, keep all the dust contained, and then just toss that. And I'll probably put some new ones down when we start grouting, and I'll put another new one over here when we start doing this section tomorrow for the tiling. Let's start day 2. All right, so as you can see, I was actually able to move out the stove, and I left the gas line connected, so I didn't even touch any of that, just unplugged it and slid it out of position. And this is gonna make it a lot easier to tile this surface, as I can stand right up against the wall. I had a lot of lower back pain after doing the tiling on this section, because you're constantly hunched over like this and going up. Versus this way, I can just do it right in front of me, get a step stool once I get up there, and I think it'll be a lot easier. The other thing I'm gonna do here is install this piece of wood. This is that ledger board I was referring to. I'm gonna put that right about here and just screw that into the studs, and then that'll be what these tiles rest on. And again, I'm going a little bit lower to hide the drywall because the stove doesn't go all the way back. Let's get to it.
Before I started tiling, I wanted to make sure that I knew exactly where the hood would be and that I could tile around it properly. So here I'm just installing that briefly just to see where it lands, as well as I put this piece of cardboard down on the floor, and that actually made a huge impact because a lot of mortar ended up falling, and you could just pick that up and throw it away. Nice and easy.
Check that piece out. This was really hard to cut. We're gonna slide it up in here real quick. Hopefully it fits.
It did fit, but it wasn't quick. I actually had to pull out that tile on the right in order to slide it into position, but then I got it back in place and kept moving. I used a full sheet of 6 tiles as many places as I could, but often I'd have to pull a tile or 2 off and put them in individually.
All right, we're making progress. I just finished going all the way to the refrigerator and got around this corner. So technically all we need to do now is just go up. Easy, right? So it is a little bit easier than I think doing it down here, but it's still a little bit tricky. And I kind of outlined where the hood's gonna be, and technically I don't need tile behind it. I think I am gonna put a little bit there, but I might not go all the way to the center, or if I do, I'm not gonna be worried about my grout joints being super perfect, or if there's a chip in the tile, not a big deal, it'll be covered. But I will focus a lot on the edges, obviously, that will be seen. So we're gonna finish today. It's about, what time is it? I think 1:32. This should maybe take me 3-4 hours, hopefully less. I usually try and overestimate. But yeah, let's get to it. Whew. I might go back and fill in these, I don't know why, just because. Anyway, I think I'm done, at least with the tiling process. What a day. This is the last piece. Oh man, it's a long time coming. It's been a long day. All right, here we go. Whew, we're done. Now it's up to clean up, take out all the spacers, clean the tile, grout, you know, and then silicone grout, but we're done with tile.
I left the spacers in overnight in order to let the mortar fully set up, and then the following morning I took all the spacers out as well as removed all the trash bags and cleaned up a little bit. I then went back with a wet paper towel and cleaned off any of the excess mortar still on the surface of the tile, and this actually worked surprisingly well.
And so now it's day 3 and we're gonna be grouting. It's pretty much the last step in the process. This is gonna be a little bit tricky. You're gonna wanna use a grout float to push it into all of the grout joints. However, with this specific tile, the edges are beveled like this. And so this is gonna be a little bit tricky because if I were to just go flat all the way across those beveled edges, I wouldn't really get all the way into the grout joint. I'd just be sitting on the surface. So I'm gonna have to use the corner of the grout float to kind of push it in, and I might even use my finger at times just to make sure it's in the right spots. And these are also 1/16 grout joints, so they're kind of small and it can be easily missed. So you wanna make sure you go back and check and make sure all grout joints are fully filled. Then after about 10 to 15 minutes, you can come back and wipe it with a wet sponge, and you're just basically cleaning off the grout. So I'm gonna add a garbage bag back over top of this. I just picked up the old one which had all the mortar on it. Put down a new garbage bag, mix up the grout, and then we'll get started. All right, so now I have my grout, and I have a little bottle of water just to add to it as it starts to dry out, because I probably won't finish this super quickly. You need my grout float here, and I'm first going to wet the surface of the tile with a sponge. It helps to make the grout flow a bit easier and doesn't get stuck on the tile as much. And then over here I have 2 buckets. Each bucket is full of water, and I have a sponge, and that'll be for once the grout starts to set up after about 10 to 15 minutes. You can wipe it down with that sponge, and then you're gonna use 1 bucket for clean water and 1 bucket for dirty water. So you'll rinse in one and then re-dunk it with new fresh water in the other and start wiping it. Sorry, I'm out of breath. I'm like tense because this is also time sensitive, just like the mortar with the tile. So anyway, let's get to it.
Grouting can be a very messy process, so try and tape off as many areas as you can, and those garbage bags definitely come in real handy. And as I mentioned, with these tiles it's a bit difficult, so I used the grout float for most of it, but then came back with my finger, as you see here, to clean up all the edges and make sure that all the grout joints were fully filled. After about 10 to 15 minutes, I came back with my sponge to clean off all the excess grout. Here I was just mainly trying to get what was on the surface, and then came back with my finger once again to get in between those beveled edges and clean up the grout joints really precisely.
So I just finished grouting up above the hood up there, so we're all done with grout, or at least I hope so. I don't think there's any voids. Pretty sure every single grout joint is fully filled at this point. And so now, as you can see, there's a bit of a haze over the tile. Haze is basically just little bits of dried grout on the surface that you have to clean off or buff out. You can use cheesecloth or an old rag. With glass tile specifically, it's extremely easy because of how smooth the surface is. However, when we did our floor, it's a very textured tile, and therefore there was a lot of pits, and the grout got caught in those, and it took a very long time to clean. However, this should be a breeze, or at least I hope so. Let's get started. Alright, so I just finished cleaning up. I took off the garbage bags and I took off all the tape. And now I'm just gonna polish the surface. It's already pretty clean, but I'm gonna use some cheesecloth. And cheesecloth works surprisingly well with glass tile. I know glass tile has a lot of negatives going for it, but cleaning it is actually really easy. The cheesecloth can basically really polish it in just a few swipes, and it'll go from fairly clean to perfectly polished in just maybe 30 seconds. So I'll show you real quick. Do it right here. Hopefully that shows up on camera, but that tile right there is like a mirror now. So we're just gonna do the whole surface. It shouldn't take long. And then, I'm not sure if I'm gonna do it tonight or tomorrow, but we still need to silicone grout all of the perimeter where it butts up against the cabinet or the countertop. That'll just create an elastic surface so that things can slightly move if they need to, and the tile won't crack as a result. So anyway, let's get to it.
Here you can really see the difference between the polished left side and the unpolished right side, so the cheesecloth really does work.
Alright, so it's now day 4. We're almost there. The last thing we have to do is those grout joints on the perimeter. And it sounds easy, but it can actually be quite difficult and lead to some problems if you're not careful with it. So here's the grout silicone caulk. If you're familiar with painter's caulk that's latex based or water based, then you can easily wipe it with your finger that's a little bit damp. However, when it comes to silicone, you gotta be careful because it'll stick to just about anything. So there's a few techniques you can use to help with this process. The first technique, which is the one I like to use, is just taping off your area. You'll basically lay some tape on both the countertop and the tile and just leave a seam right between them, right where you want to fill your caulk. Then you'll just use your finger, wipe it. You don't need to be careful about it because the tape's already there. And then before it fully dries, you pull the tape away and you're all done. So that one's pretty simple. However, it does take a while to get your tape lines nice and perfect, so that can take a little bit of time. The other option is to use some soapy water, and you just spray that on wherever you want to use your silicone grout, and then you will just use your finger and wipe it away, and the soapy water will help you to get rid of the excess. Without that, it'll basically just stick to everything. Now, I'm not gonna use that method because I'm working with cabinets, and those are made of wood, and the finish is quite delicate, so I don't wanna mess with that, so I don't wanna use any water or soap on those, so instead I'll be going the tape route. And then once the grout's done, we can install the hood. So let's get started. Hey, so actually scratch what I just said. So I just finished taping out the countertop and the cabinets, as you can see. However, I didn't do the tile surface yet, as I talked about, and that's because this tile has a lot of undulations because of that bevel, and I don't think I could get a really accurate tape line with the tape, and then when I pull it away, I think it'd be almost jagged, the silicone grout. So what I'm gonna actually do is use a hybrid of the techniques that I talked about. Leave the tape where it is, but then also spray the tile with a little bit of soapy water and then wipe it clean, and I think that'll work best. So let's get to it. I'm not a huge fan of tiling to begin with. It's a lot of hard work and it takes a lot of precise measuring. However, this part right here is my least favorite of all. It's also a good idea to put on some latex gloves to protect your hands because it does get messy. Okay, I'm gonna try and do this joint here. So I'm gonna apply the grout first, the silicone, then I'm gonna spray the tile with some soapy water, then come back with my finger and wipe it, then pull the tape away. That's at least ideally what happens. I'm not sure what's gonna happen now, but it's so scary because you can really screw up your tile job if you get this all over the tile or if the lines are messy, so it's nerve-wracking.
that's going to be a wrap on this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it and learned something along the way. I'd really appreciate it if you could give it a like. If you guys made it this far into the video, I hope you liked it. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. We post a new DIY video every single Saturday on this channel, and it'll keep you up to date on the progress of this lake house. And if you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments below, and I'd be happy to answer them. And as always, thanks for watching, and happy building. See you next week.